Today we're going to be looking at what the 16 personality types are like in school. Not just how they are in the classroom, but how they are outside of the classroom as well. I try to make this video applicable to any stage of schooling. High school, college, postgraduate, you're taking a class on the weekends to learn French or whatever. I think relatively it should make sense in all those situations. So think back to when you were in school, or maybe you're in school right now. Or are you the student sitting in the back of the class trying to avoid all of the hustle and bustle? Or are you the class clown causing chaos? Were you the mega brain at the top of your class, or the student who didn't even know there was homework last night? Oh crap, that was me. And talking about school, that makes this next sponsored segment very fitting. Hey, you put tomato on my BLT. Yeah, what do you think the T in BLT stands for? Well, I know what T doesn't stand for. Tip. Because you are not getting one from me. I think it's time for me to find a career I'll actually enjoy. Well, luckily for you, Southern New Hampshire University is sponsoring this segment. Who are you? I'm just a guy who at one point not too long ago also felt like he was being held back on his career path. Yeah, it doesn't feel good. Many nights I couldn't fall asleep because I just kept thinking, dude, what am I supposed to do? You're supposed to get this tomato off of my sandwich. Okay, let's get out of here. Good luck with that sandwich. Rude! SNHU has one of the largest accredited nonprofit online degree offerings in the US. How many degrees do they have? Over 200. 200? I think you might like SNHU's social media marketing degree the most. Well, I do watch a lot of YouTube. In this program, you'll learn how to use social media to grab customers' attention, build their loyalty, and grow business. Those sound like really useful skills considering most businesses today are using social media marketing. Courses are taught by industry experts, and all of SNHU's programs are extremely flexible. Like, there's no set class times, allowing you to work when and where you want. Yes, you are speaking my language right now. If you are ready to switch to a career you will love, SNHU's social media marketing program can help. I'm ready. Go to snhu.edu/frankjames to learn more, or click the link in the description. Thanks to SNHU for sponsoring that segment, and now back to my regularly scheduled content. My hair's doing this flippy thing. I look like I got wings, like I'm ready to fly away. First up is the myth, the legend, the ESTP. Often imitated, never duplicated. I don't think that's correct. ESTPs are the type most likely to end up as the popular sports player or the person who everyone knows is cool. Although I guess it's not very cool if you put it in quotes. Yeah, that guy, he's cool, I guess. No, but seriously, ESTPs are either the person who is at every party or throwing the party themselves. In general, they like to be involved in a lot of different things at school, and they aren't afraid to be in new situations or try things out, which means they can usually mold well into most school groups that aren't too theoretical in nature. So you might not find them in like the philosophy club, if such a thing exists. ESTPs sometimes struggle with keeping their attention on the more academic side of school, and their scheduling skills might not be the best, but their preference for thinking can lead them to be quite inventive in their approach to academics. ESTPs are generally pretty smart, but it's also not uncommon for them to find shortcuts or even loopholes to make their time in school a little easier. You know, like befriending a classmate who actually paid attention in class. Or maybe even understanding a class's grading system so well that they know the minimum amount of work they need to do in order to pass. Every teacher's dream student. ESFPs are school's natural social butterflies. I call them butterflies because I was gonna try to do a float like a butterfly, sting like a bee joke. It wouldn't have made sense. They're butterflies because they tend to float around and are happy being friends with most people. They just want to have a good time. Now, they aren't super cliquey. In other words, they're not going to stick to one group of people and look down on people who are not in that group. Instead, you'll usually find them jumping between all the different social groups in the lunchroom or in the hallway or on campus, just so they can see who is having the most fun right now. If they happen to be passionate about learning, you might see them put a lot of energy into that. But overall, ESFPs tend to be less interested when it comes to the books. Instead, you are most likely to find ESFPs involved with many different activities that allow them to be social while also having fun. To illustrate this, I knew an ESFP in high school. We'll call him Tad. He really exemplified this. He tried out for every activity and he did them all well. Band, theater, soccer, dance. He also happened to be really smart. He got good grades. He was like in the honor society. Everyone liked him. ESFPs, they just can't help but being so darn likable. ISTJs usually do very well in school, even if they don't have the most expansive social lives. Their desire for things to be correct and specific can sometimes lead them to be the kind of person who's like, oh, professor, you forgot to assign homework. Maybe you wanted to give us like 30 pages of reading to do or something like that. And then everyone is like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna strangle you. The ISTJs, they just have a desire to go above and beyond, but this could get them labeled as being perfectionists or nerds or even the teacher's pet. In reality, though, ISTJs don't mean to annoy other students or be problematic with their attention to detail. It's just that they enjoy structure and order, and they want things to follow a predictable routine. They also just hate having unfinished work. It gives them anxiety. ISTJs would make bad ghosts. You know, they've unfinished business. A benefit to this, though, is that many ISTJs do well academically. Beyond the classroom, you can sometimes even find them taking on positions in school that allow them to be part of organizing and planning things like class trips or events. If there is ever a student you can go to if you don't know what the homework assignment was, it's the ISTJ. Though they might be like, well, you should have written this down, but here it is. ISFJs are an interesting mix of quiet and social. You can usually find them spending a lot of time with one smaller social group and doing their best to make sure their school friends are happy. To ISFJs, school isn't a race, and it's okay to enjoy the moment and create memories with friends. As such, it's not uncommon to find ISFJs getting involved in and putting great importance on milestone events that happen through the school year. You know, stuff like orientation or homecoming week or graduation. ISFJs often appreciate the pomp and circumstance of these moments the most of all the 16 personalities. If you didn't get that joke, Pomp and Circumstance is a song that is traditionally played at graduation. At least in the United States. I don't know elsewhere. Let me know in the comments. Academically, ISFJs are surprisingly studious because they like to really take time to digest and learn information, even if it might take them a little bit longer than some of the other types. So like ISFJs are the type of students who don't seem to catch on to concepts early in the semester, but by finals, they're the ones who you want as a study buddy, because not only do they understand it better than anyone else, but they also tend to have taken very organized notes. Now we move on to the extroverted thinking types. We have the ESTJ, who tends to charge through school like a battering ram of organization. In fact, they like to organize so much that you can almost always find them volunteering to take the lead on group projects. And watch out, because if you get an ESTJ as a group leader, they're not gonna let you slide through without doing your share of the work. I mean, come on, buddy. What do you think you're doing, guy? This comfort with leading has its downsides, though, as some of their fellow students might find the ESTJ to be too bossy or perhaps even intimidating. This can present a challenge socially for the ESTJs if they don't learn to reel in that natural desire to tell people what to do. They might accidentally garner a reputation for being a control freak or even just not being terribly fun to hang around. But the truth is, ESTJs are just focused on getting stuff done. It's like, guys, we are in school. Let us get things done. That is the purpose of being here. They also usually take on extra activities ranging from sports to running for school representative positions like class president, usually against their sibling type, the ENTJ, who we're talking about next. ENTJs are all about reaching their goals, even in school. They are typically very competitive, so you can often find them in any school activity that offers them a chance to beat other people. Not literally beat them, but you know, like a class election or a sport or a club that competes against other clubs, etc. I mean, the big thing about ENTJs that you gotta understand is that they love a challenge, especially when it lines up with their long-term goals. So they might push themselves to take the most advanced classes, to double major, to do the extra credit, if it is setting the groundwork for them to quickly excel after graduation and maybe even for years to come. They usually find it pretty easy to balance their school and social lives because of their organizational skills, but a struggle related to this is that they want to be surrounded by people who can keep up with them, and there ain't that many people who can do that, is there? Because of this, ENTJ's social circles can vary quite dramatically. Might just be one friend, or even a rival, or maybe it's a whole club of people with similar interests. Now, others in their school might find them off-putting or difficult to get along with at times if the ENTJs aren't careful. But the ENTJs are like, oh, I don't really care about that because in 10 years, I'll be their boss, and then they'll have to like me because I'll be signing their paychecks. Check. Mate. ESFJs know what's going on, who's doing what, and most importantly, how it affects the status quo. You know that High School Musical song, "Stick to the status quo"? I don't even know if I'm remembering this correctly. Is that High School Musical? You can usually find ESFJs either conversing with the coolest people in school, the ESFPs, or they might even have risen to the point of being the coolest person, and everyone wants to hang out with them. When a school event is on the horizon, ESFJs ESFJs are the ones who most want to be involved, whether it's a dance, a fundraiser, even reunions after school. These are all events where you might see an ESFJ in the lead. You know that person who's always emailing the entire school like, hey, who's excited for National Donut Day, guys? I'm the president of the newly created donut club and we got donuts in the student union building. And you're like, why did they give this guy access to the entire school's email? One struggle area for the ESFJs in school, they often are not interested that much in school itself. You know, some ESFJs just see school as the place they go to do their socializing, and classes are just a necessary thing they have to do in between the socializing. Of course, this varies depending on what level of school we're talking about. Much more common in high school and maybe even college or university if we're in England. ESFJs are definitely the type that are going to struggle the most with balancing their academics and their social life. Now with ENFJs, you might find them taking up leadership positions or running for class-related positions a lot like the other EJs. The reasons that the ENFJ is a bit different though is that ENFJs want to make the school experience better for everyone, and the way they know how to do that is through uniting people together to work towards a goal. So while they're pretty social, ENFJs can also have a fast pace that's hard for their friends to keep up with. So you might find that their social circles are smaller than their ESFJ counterparts. ENFJs won't hesitate to stop and help those who are struggling in school, whether academically or especially socially. They'll be the one to say, hey, that guy is just like sitting by himself over here. Let's invite him to have lunch with us or whatever. In fact, they might find themselves taking on too much work trying to help others who might not even be as interested or motivated as they are, which can cause the ENFJ to fall behind on their own work. For example, if an ENFJ is in a group project, even if they are the group leader, rather than do what an ESTJ might do and push the other group members to do their fair share of the work, the ENFJ might just do the other people's work for them, quietly resentful that they carried the team on their back.
Dog, he put the team on his back.
ISTPs are an interesting mix of traits when it comes to school. They are often the loner, okay? But this can go one of two ways. They can be like the loner who spends a lot of time in school, just their nose to the grindstone, studying some kind of brainiac thing like, you know, engineering, computer technology, physics, or any other intellectual or technical class, because the ISTPs are very smart. On the other extreme though, they can be like the kind of loner who's like the bad boy who has zero interest in school and barely pays attention and is like, whatever guys, I got better stuff to do. For these reasons, ISTPs are often like that one chill guy in class who doesn't say a whole lot, but the other students are like, oh yeah, he seems cool, but I'm not really sure if he's cool because he rarely talks to me. And that's the ISTP's secret. Say nothing, create mystery, and become popular without trying. If you take nothing else away from this video, learn from the ISTPs. Socially, the ISTPs might not be throwing any parties or even attending any parties, but there's something about them, there's some allure that gets them invited to all of them. And if the ISTP shows up at a social event, when they walk through the door, everyone stops and goes, whoa, is that who I think that is? Dude, he actually showed up. This is awesome. Also, ISTPs often have a short patience for people they don't like. So because of that, they can get themselves into difficult situations or even socially exiled if they are too frequently honest about their opinions of others. In other words, they can be blunt and people don't like it. INTPs notoriously have an interesting relationship with school. Their heavy preference for thinking can make them amazing students with top-of-the-line grades, except they often struggle to actually get stuff done on time or even remember that there was homework to do in the first place. For many INTPs, actually learning stuff is more important than the grades they get. So what can happen is they spend a lot of time studying a variety of their favorite topics and going down rabbit holes only to forget to complete their assignments. Albert Einstein, as an example, is a quintessential INTP. Like, he was brilliant, but he often struggled in school, even dropping out of one school because he didn't like how structured it was, and failing the entrance exam for another school because he didn't care about the subjects he wasn't interested in. Social life can also be a big struggle for INTPs in school. They're generally one of the most introverted types, and with feeling as their inferior function, social situations can be anxiety-inducing and/or extremely awkward for them. For these reasons, many INTPs prefer to just have a small number of close friends throughout their school years. People who get them and who aren't afraid to be a little strange alongside them. ISFPs can usually be found in whatever class inspires them the most. Usually something on the more artistic side of things, like band or art or creative writing. I mean, they can of course do well in any class, but their strong feeling preference mixed with their sensing preference often gives them a desire to create things based on their feelings that can then be expressed to others. Mathematics, for example, doesn't really scratch that itch. Unless they're like, guys, look, I created this equation which expresses how I feel about ISFPs prefer to put a lot of their learning energy into things that are personally meaningful to them, as opposed to what might actually be useful for them to know. The other side of that is that ISFPs will be the first people to point out that something like the quadratic formula is generally not a useful thing to know. Socially, ISFPs can be a little snobby, okay? But not because they gravitate towards being part of a clique or, you know, a tightly knit social group, but rather you might find them looking down on the students who are part of those social cliques. Because to ISFPs, they feel like it's a stab at their identity or their uniqueness to try to fit in with others. This might cause them to be voluntary outcasts or to have trouble making friends if they can't find others who value the same things. INFPs are interesting when it comes to school, and they usually fall into one of two categories. The shy person sitting in the back of the room who doesn't want anyone to notice them, or the person who goes out of their way to stand out and be unique by going against the norm. I know, a lot of you are getting ready to write a angry comment and be like,
"No, Frank, there's no way an INFP would ever try to stand out."
but listen, playa, INFPs can't help standing out. The funny thing is, a lot of times they can be both of those extremes. They'll be the shy student who won't look you in the eye as you cross paths with them on campus, but they also might happen to be like an amazing actor who stars in the drama department's major production, or perhaps writes that production. Much like their ISFP counterpart, INFPs can find themselves spending a lot of time in whatever class speaks to them on a personal level. Though because of their intuition preference, it's not uncommon for their interests to change rapidly. Maybe one day they love art, the next day music, the next day literature, and so on and so forth. Maybe one day they love air conditioning repair. For those reasons, you might find that INFPs have a surprisingly wide social circle for being such an introverted type. So much so that they might quickly and unintentionally make friends and then struggle to maintain those friendships as their interests shift. I like to call ENFPs the wild cards of school. You know why? Because they are wild cards, man. No, but seriously, no one is keeping them in one place for too long. Like all of the FP types, they like to follow their hearts and chase whatever is fun to them, whether it's hanging out with friends, a class they really like, a club or activity, sitting on a bench, eating Doritos. I don't know. ENFPs don't tend to stick to one social circle and will instead integrate themselves pretty naturally into whatever one involves their current random obsession. You'll just be at your lunch table with your usual friends and all of a sudden this new person is there and they're like, "Hey guys, what are we talking about today?" And you're like, "Who are you?" But then 5 minutes later, it was like they had been there all along. Life is a game to ENFPs and they want to have as much fun as possible playing that game. Because of this, they can sometimes take on that class clown role, uniting people and making friends just by being spontaneous and having a creative comeback to anything that happens around them. I mean, it really just comes down to ENFPs like joking around and they like taking things too far. Put those two things together, you got a class clown. What they struggle with is the ability to stay on track with one interest long enough to actually finish things. They might find themselves in trouble because they took on a responsibility for a group project when they were excited about it, but then they got bored and decided they didn't want to do it anymore, leaving all their classmates to pick up the slack, leaving their poor ENFJ group leader to do all the work for them. ENTPs are an interesting mix of academics, social life, and even sometimes the arts. They generally want to be involved in school activities that will allow them to flex both their intellectual abilities as well as their improvisational ones. So you might see them take on like the most stereotypical activity like joining the debate team or a mock trial where they could just test their wit against others in a high-speed environment. Less stereotypically, ENTPs also find their way into comedy, improv, or even theater because those pursuits offer them the opportunity to solve problems even if they are like fake problems on the stage under a bit of pressure, which is what they love. Socially, they can be known for being eccentric, not necessarily in a bad way, but ENTPs tend to think and act fast, sometimes so fast that they don't have the time to like process things through a filter. This can lead them to being in situations where others get put off by their unpredictable and seemingly random thoughts and behaviors. In terms of academics, they're fine. ENTPs, they tend to be very smart and just kill it at school. No issues there. Your valedictorian, probably an ENTP who didn't even try that hard. INTJs are the students who sit in the back of the class, don't seem to pay too much attention, rarely seem to be putting in any effort, and they somehow get good grades. They're the student where you're like, hey, you know, did you study for the test? And they're like, we have a test today? And then they get a better score than you. Because they are single-minded and goal-focused, they usually spend a lot of energy trying to do well in one or two classes that they really find useful or interesting, and then just barely doing enough to get by in the other classes. They're probably also calculating like, you know, their grade point average and being like, well, if I totally flunk these other classes, but I get hundreds in these other ones, I can still pass. I mentioned earlier that ESTPs are good at finding loopholes to get by in school and like gaming the system, but look, INTJs are the master of doing this. And this can be a downside because an INTJ who is used to doing well in school with minimal effort or like gaming the system might be in for a rude awakening after graduation. Socializing is not really an INTJ's priority in school, so if they happen to be missing out on all the parties and events or whatever, they usually don't care. They might even accidentally offend people by ignoring their texts or forgetting to get back to people when they are invited out somewhere. I guess the way to think about it is that INTJs aren't typically antisocial or struggling with extreme social anxiety. They just got more important things to focus on. They got bigger fish to fry. You know, anecdotally, me being a theater guy back in school, which is why there's so many references to theater in this video, I feel like the theater tech often attracted a disproportionate number of INTJs. You know, these are the people who like sit in the booth during a play and they're like hitting the button to make all the sound cues go and change the lights and whatever. It was like they enjoyed being a part of the larger production, especially because they got to be in control and pull all the strings and, in a sense, play God. And they got to wear black. INFJs are usually academically oriented students who want just a little bit of social life for their school experience. It's like, yeah, they want a combo meal. They want a large academic burger with just a little side of social fries. Small study groups, hanging out with one or two friends after classes, and having a small friend group where everyone supports each other and all that feeling stuff. Despite the INFJ feeling as though they only have a small friend group, many others throughout the school might think that the INFJ is actually their close friend because INFJs so easily blend in with whatever group they happen to be in. Because of that ability to blend in, INFJs usually have a relatively easy time navigating those social aspects of school and end up having a much wider circle of friends and acquaintances than they might even realize. One struggle area they might face is their own introversion going against their goals. So maybe they see how they could lead a group project or organize an event or even become like a class representative. Maybe they even see the problems, like they're in a group project and they see how the group is being run poorly and they're just like, it's just too much energy. Just the idea of all the energy it would take to pursue those goals can lead them to abandon them. I think this makes an INFJ a prime candidate for doing well in school, but still underachieving. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay cool and attractive.
They say strangers come to town.